Hello, my name is Dave Emory, and this is Side 1 of For the Record program number 743, Interview with Russ Baker. This is being recorded on Friday, May 27th of the year 2011, the Friday of Memorial Day weekend. And once again, it is my pleasure and privilege to bring back to our airwaves Russ Baker, the author of the consummately important Family of Secrets and the editor-in-chief of the Who, What, Why website. Russ, welcome back to our airwaves.
Thanks, Dave. It's always a pleasure to be here. Very stimulating experience, and I'm never disappointed.
All righty. Well, let's hope that I live up to that remarkable billing. We've spoken about Family of Secrets many times in the past, and 7 hours worth, and I think it is indicative of the weightiness and the meatiness of the book that we still, we scratched the surface, but no more than that. We have not spoken that much about the website, the Who, What, Why website, and one of the articles on your website, and I think something that might provide us with an element of transition from the past to the present, because I really don't think in terms of political analysis one can separate those. But that is your article about what Obama is up against, for one, and also your recent article about the history of the petroleum industry and the national security establishment, this in the wake of yet another unsuccessful attempt at removing the tax breaks from big oil. In terms of let's start with Obama's presidency. A lot of people have been very disappointed in what he has done or what he hasn't done in many cases. A person who was one of my role models is the political comedian Mort Saul, who, as a lot of people know, was one of Jim Garrison's investigators. And in his autobiography, Heartland, in 1976, Mort Saul asked the question, how many lies can you allow yourself to believe before you belong to the lie? And then he asked, is it too late for America? And I think that might be an interesting point of departure for an analysis of Obama and the petroleum industry and what he has and has not been able to do. What is Barack Obama up against, in your opinion? How would you synopsize that article? And if I could, the links between your massive book and what is going on today, I think, might provide a frame of reference for the audience.
Well, Dave, as you know, my book, Family of Secrets, and the subtitle is The Bush Dynasty, America's Invisible Government, and the Hidden History of the Last 50 Years. I think that last part of Family of Secrets subtitle, The Hidden History of the Last 50 Years, is maybe what we ought to key in on. Mm-hmm. And that is about the gulf between what we are told and what has actually been going on. And I certainly can't claim to know entirely what was going on, but in the 5 years that I spent researching Family of Secrets, I began pushing on some doors that I hadn't pushed on before, discovering some new rabbit holes, if you will, and beginning to see in case after case after case that there was the story that we'd been told both by the establishment media and also by academia to a large extent. And then there was a very different reality on the ground. And this was almost traumatic for me because as a longtime journalist, I have liked to believe that I had a good grasp on things. And when I realized how little I had a grasp on, even after years of doing investigative work, I really said, wow, there's a whole different ballgame here. So when we look at Barack Obama, I think he needs to be seen in the context of what shaped, affected, and happened to the prior occupants of the White House. Now, Family of Secrets, which is nominally an investigative history of the Bush family, is really about all presidents. And we have sections on John F. Kennedy, Richard Nixon, Jimmy Carter, and other presidents. And I really began looking at how all presidents get to the top and then why they do what they do when they're there. Now,
and also Gerald Ford, we should add.
Gerald Ford and others, but Lyndon Johnson to some extent. Now, what I'm talking about here is that we have a kind of a pageant with the presidency. It's easier for us to sort of pay attention to things if they could all sort of be seen kind of in the entertainment arena. And so these are opportunities to sort of have favorites and to bet and to watch hopefuls come up and then crash and surprise horses coming from behind and what have you. And so that kind of narrative is the one that we tend to like as people, and it's the one that the media gladly serves up time and again. And also part of that is the sort of the president character is this kind of singular figure strutting upon the stage of history, riding in, galloping in, and so forth, hung on their own petard and so on. But the reality is quite different, and that is that power plays long. And power is about interests, and interests don't go away, and they certainly don't go away willingly. And we don't cover interests very well, and it's almost like they don't exist. It's kind of like, for example, now who will be the Republican nominee is the current game, although, in fact, whoever it is going to have to be somebody who is acceptable to certain sectors that, as I say, are not discussed. And so when you look at Barack Obama, you have to understand that he could never have gotten to the top unless he was deemed acceptable enough to these sectors, and that his range of movement as president is constricted by these same interests.
I'd like to just briefly jump in. One of the things that was remarkable about Obama was the rise. I think it's a safe bet that in 2000 almost nobody had heard of him in America. And then by 2004 he was the next big thing on the horizon. And by 2008 primaries he was a walk. So it's all pay for play in this society now. And you don't get that fast without some very powerful interests behind him. So yes, go ahead. Absolutely.
We don't examine someone like Barack Obama much better than we do someone on American Idol. The person just comes up and there they are in the spotlight. And that's inadequate. And so what I tried to do with Family of Secrets and what we do with our ongoing news and analysis website, whowhatwhy.com, is to examine all of these people while they're in power, while they're on their way to power, while they're trying to get power, to understand not just who they are, but more importantly, who they're shaped by. Because people always say, well, you and I could never be president, but then why would that be? I mean, really, if anyone can grow up to be president, then anyone should be able to be president, but in fact, they can't be. And so in the case of Obama, there are a lot of interesting things one could look at about him that I think would be indicators of the limited range of movement to which he would be inclined. But even assuming that he would like to do more, we have this back history of what happened to presidents who did try to do more. And in Family of Secrets, I focus particularly on two people you would think who are so-called nemeses and who you would think would be polar opposites in every respect, John F. Kennedy and Richard M. Nixon. And yet what you see when you really study what happened to them was that both men, once they obtained the presidency, began stretching their wings and began trying to do things that the presidency supposedly allows an individual to do. And they both discovered that no, you may not do those things if those things are unacceptable to certain sectors. Now, people may be wondering, what do I mean by these sectors? I'm talking about things that we know exist. These are not phantasms. These are the oil industry, the most powerful industry the earth has ever known. Just given that ought to be covered every day very aggressively, and yet it's not covered really at all. And the other one is the one that all the way back 50 years ago, Dwight Eisenhower warned us about, the so-called military-industrial complex, which actually now might well be called the military-industrial espionage, financial, academic, add whatever other words you want to that, complex. And this is again not a figment of our imagination, but one of the most powerful constructs that has ever existed on Earth. Nobody would deny that it is there, and yet, again, we don't cover it and we don't talk about it. So these are, I think, the power centers the constituencies that ultimately matter the most to a president, to whether they're going to get in, to whether they're going to stay in, and to what they do when they're in power.
Another interesting article, and we can talk about the oil industry in more specific terms in a couple of minutes, but there was an article that, let me, I can't recall the exact title. It had a very eye-catching and not altogether attractive picture of Barack Obama in front of Air Force One, but with a Donald Trump hairstyle graphicked in. And the article is called "Trump is Not the Carnival Sideshow. The Political, quote, normal, unquote, is." One of my favorite quotes, and I'm going to ask you to sort of take off on that article from this quote, one of my favorite quotes comes from author Edith Wharton, who said, "A frivolous society can only achieve dramatic significance through what its frivolity destroys," which I think is just a great quote, and it's a deep one. But in a way, I think that's if I understood what Ms. Wharton was talking about, it's what you're talking about in that article. You know, behind the carnival sideshow, I mean, Trump is the north end of a southbound horse, but he's also a very potent political animal too, and he's not really very funny. And yet, you know, we see this reality TV show nonsense. And it looks ludicrous. I think it also tends to turn people off on politics and debase the whole frame of debate. But really, the phenomenon of Trump the candidate, Trump the reality talk show host, distracts us from just how ludicrous our political intellectual culture is.
Well, right, and what I'm getting at is that if you looked with any degree of objectivity at the problems facing the United States and the world today, which are so incredibly grave, and then you see the scope and the pace of the action with regard to those problems, you have to say that the central show itself, forget about the Trumps and the Palins and what have you, the central show itself is ludicrous on its face. And I feel that the Trumps and what have you play a very crucial role. First of all, Trump is a very serious businessman in the sense that he markets himself as a brander, that he will come into somebody's building, an ordinary building they're putting up. He will put his name and his face on there, and they will be able to jack up the rates for the place because a certain sector of the populace will then want to have that brand on their apartment. And that's really what he is. And so for him, any kind of television show, no matter what it is that gets ratings, any kind of thing like running for president is good for his brand. He needs that. Just as movie stars, we think that their lives are so tumultuous, but a lot of that is invented because it keeps them in the public eye, and that is the where we get the marquee names, and that's what draws us to go see their movies. So that's how the system works. Now, the central act itself then is given this, is sort of invested with this sort of gravitas that it doesn't deserve. And then we don't look at things like, okay, so Obama clearly much more serious than these other candidates, and yet right now the United States is involved in, well, I'd say at least 3 wars, possibly more depending on how you count them. Maybe Pakistan a 4th one, and I'm counting Libya as well. Mm-hmm. And so what are those wars about? And if we stop to say, well, now, please explain why we are in those wars. Now, that would seem to be a central question, something that ought to be being discussed on a daily basis, and yet it's not. You've got someone like a Dennis Kucinich who's out there looking like he's some kind of a nut for sort of raising these types of questions, very much an outcast. And so they're able to kind of skew the whole thing and keep people away from talking about what really matters, which is that the central activities of our government, the central uses of our tax dollars are not understood to us and don't make any sense. And so these sideshows are crucial because you and I, outside of our work and outside of our families and our most urgent personal concerns, we only have a little bit of bandwidth left. And if they can fill that bandwidth up with Dancing with the Stars and Sarah Palin's daughter's scandals and what we think of Donald Trump's hairdo and so forth, they've filled that up. There is nothing left for us to worry about the state of our democracy.
One of the things that I find really vexatious, and yet it also is the raison d'etre for my program. It's underground and always has been and always will be. But that is basically our media do not do their job, and neither does our educational system. I would encapsulate that by basically saying that both are at the purse strings level controlled by the same powerful corporate interests that affect many of these machinations. But the media do not do their job. One of my favorite catchphrases on this program is that the fourth estate has metamorphosed into a fifth column. And they really are accessories to criminal behavior, accessories after the fact in most cases, because they will not tell the truth. The Gray Lady being an example of this. The New York Times is certainly well worth reading. I read it when I can. I've got an awful lot of reading to do on top of the day job, but at the same time, it's also the CIA's #1 propaganda asset. They publish the Warren Report, which is fiction, and when the chips are on the table, so to speak, with regard to intelligence matters, the New York Times can be counted upon to come down squarely on the side of reaction. The pillorying of Gary Webb being an example after he broke the CIA cocaine story. The New York Times published the Warren Report, which is nonsense. It's fiction. And they're quite good at doing this. And yet, compared with some papers, the New York Times is, it is in a class by itself. So our media don't do their job. We don't get the investigative reporting, and I've devoted this broadcast to try to close that gap. And the 6 hours we did just about exactly a year ago, with another follow-up interview last December, being an example of that. Certainly, you're not going to get on the main talk shows. You're not going to get on Meet the Press. You're not even has the New York Times touched your book?
They requested specifically an advance copy. One of their top reviewers requested an advance copy of my book, wanted to be the first person to review it. We did supply the book, and then nothing ever happened.
Mm-hmm. Which is kind of how things go. Another of my favorite phrases is an old Turkish proverb: "He who tells the truth gets chased out of 9 villages," or perhaps just doesn't get their book reviewed by the New York Times, which is a way of chasing you out of a lot of villages. Because
I think what happens here is it's more insidious than some sort of organized suppression. What you're looking at is all of us, if we are practical people, having a sense of what it takes to get a job, keep a job, perhaps advance. And we know pretty well, I don't care what you do for a living, you know pretty well what will fly with the bosses and what won't. And you know what will fly with the customers and what won't. And so you do your best to kind of stay within those bounds. So when you work at the New York Times or CBS or anything else, you may be a perfectly good person. You probably got into journalism because you cared and you wanted to make a difference. And you do. You make a difference as much as you can. But there's the key phrase, as much as you can. And so I am told privately all the time, gee, I'd love to, this started when I was shopping the Family of Secrets manuscript that through my agent, that the various publishers literally said, boy, is that what a book that is. I only wish I had the blankety blanks to publish it. Mm-hmm. They realized they were going to have some problems. And so every point we would discuss, will this place be too afraid? Will this place be too afraid? And so this is not exclusive to Family of Secrets. Anything particularly explosive will not be heard. And what is heard that's explosive is scandal, but it's not new history. And so you might say, oh, well, we heard about Dominique Strauss-Kahn, that's explosive. Well, it's a personal scandal of a famous person, and that they will do. But if you actually think about what you've been told over the years on programs, perhaps in school, high school, or university in your classes and so on, there has never been a total break with the past, no revelation as there is in every other field in medicine and in physics and so on, where they say, wow, we've got a whole new understanding of things here. And then, there's in those fields, by the way, of course, there's tremendous resistance from the establishment always. But eventually something new comes through. Usually the people with the new theory or the new whatever are ridiculed or ignored or attacked. But eventually they prevail. And, of course, we see this in art. We see this in everything. It's particularly consequential, of course, with our understanding of how our world works in terms of decisions affecting life and death, freedom, the health and goodwill of the public, and so forth. And so the inability to get a narrative like Family of Secrets or other books like it. My book has 50 pages of footnotes. We went to great lengths to make it credible and palatable to the establishment. It's from a well-respected mainstream publisher. It has blurbs on the cover from beloved, extremely well-known figures, and we had to do all that, and that helped a little bit. But even with that, we've been told time and again, what you reveal in this book is so disturbing and so contrary to what we understood and what we've been saying all this time. We simply don't know how to deal with that.
The Moritz Saul quote from his, how many lies can you allow yourself to believe before you belong to the lie? Again, it also reminds me of the famous Upton Sinclair quote. It's difficult to get a man or a person, updating it to a non-gender specific context. It's difficult to get a person to understand something when keeping their job depends on their not understanding it. And I think that is certainly one of the things that's bedeviled Family of Secrets. Nonetheless, though, I think you've done a remarkable job. I never expected to see a lot of that stuff coming out in a mainstream book. I mean, I was aware of it. I've covered quite a bit of that in various broadcasts over 3+ decades, but I never expected to see it in a mainstream book, and I sure never expected to see, Dan Rather, Bill Moyers, Gore Vidal endorsing that. It was a stunning thing, and it's a great achievement. I think the frontiers of investigative reporting in this country have been pushed back by that, and I think it's going to enable others to take more forward steps than they otherwise would have been able to do. Although you may not see all of the fruit of that being born in your lifetime.
It's interesting you mentioned investigative reporting. I belong to various associations of investigative reporters, and they're good people, and they're trying to do a good job. But I've noticed and been discussing this with some colleagues how when you look at, say, the awards that are given out and so forth, they're sort of astonishing by their pettiness in a way that they seem to look for and reward people who set their sights pretty low, and I'm not saying this is bad journalism. It's good journalism, but it's very limited. And so stories about one-offs, a town where the city council was corrupt, a particular agency where one thing really went bad, and what they seem to be saying almost by exclusion is that we don't want to draw attention to anything that's systemic. We don't want to draw attention to anything that really questions the basic values that we say that we espouse. And I find as I travel around the world and talking to people in other countries, they have a much better grasp almost anywhere but in this country of how power really works. And from Turkey, where they coined the concept of the deep state, to Mexico, which sees now a situation of almost total chaos there, up to Scandinavia, where I was last summer, places like Finland and so on, where they talk to me even there, countries that are very high on the integrity and transparency scales, rated way above the United States, and they say that even in their countries, they don't really, what is discussed publicly is not what goes on behind the scenes, that there are a handful of families and companies and so on that exert enormous amounts of influence, sub rosa, shaping the events for everyone else.
The late Stig Larsson's novels, which became hit movies and books in this country last year, Christopher Hitchens had a piece in Vanity Fair in which he quoted a Swedish police and intelligence official as saying the things Stig Larsson wrote about actually occurred, it's just that he gave them fictional names. And that is part of, and Sweden certainly is a very civilized society, but that is an example of that. But here in America, we really are, in many ways, this is like a society of adolescents. America's like a giant high school with a multi-trillion-dollar budget in nuclear weapons, which sounds ludicrous, but the enormous unchecked corporate power that exists here, and with corresponding national security power, basically is, at least to what I can tell, irresistible. It is certainly dominant with a capital D.
Yeah, I mean, what they've got now is the system rigged to the point where, and when I use the term they, people always say, well, who do you mean by they? But they is whatever, fill in that corporate name you want to fill in, have things rigged to the point where all of these different elements or institutions that were supposed to check each other they're all neutralized now. You were talking about the fourth estate, so the media is neutralized. The clergy in this country overwhelmingly, it's certainly not what it was at one point. You had a much more vibrant liberation theology out there. Obviously, the Congress is seriously compromised, very, very weak and timid compared, let's say, to the mid-1970s. The judiciary has moved so far away from what seemed at one point almost like it actually did have people on there who would sit and hear a case with a kind of an open mind and try to figure out, was there some way to derive a just and appropriate solution, to where we really suspect all of the people on there, from right to left, of having an agenda and some constituency that they're serving. So, and then, of course, the executive branch. And so this is a serious, serious problem. And, it's interesting. Sometimes people say to me, well, I read Family of Secrets. It really traumatized me. It changed my understanding of so many things, or it thrilled me because to see a whole different, to get a whole different understanding and have things sort of fall into place, things I'd been thinking about and wondering for years. But some people come up and they say, gee, ultimately, though, it's sort of immobilizing and depressing, and what can we do? And I would argue that it's not our job to make sure that people aren't depressed, that it's not our job to worry that, to give you more good news or happy talk, although on our website, Who, What, Why, we are putting a few funny things and a few good news things just to acknowledge the human need for that. But you can go elsewhere for that. There are flowers and puppies everywhere. Mm-hmm. But that we need to get past that what you call that high school thing, that need to guard our own fragile emotions. We're much tougher when we need to be. And this is a time when we need to be tougher. And we need to sort of sit up straight, and we need to see, maybe we need the proverbial bucket of cold water in our face, and to say, wow, so this is how things really work. Because then what we can do is once we have a grasp of things, we can begin thinking about, what do you do with that situation?
Let's talk about that more on side 2. We're almost out of time on side 1. Tell them about the website. Our
website is whowhatwhy.com. We are a 501c3 nonprofit. So if I may say so, if you like what we do, you can be part of the family. We can't do this. We can't hire and train more reporters and add content without public support. You can go to the site right at the top there. There's a right-hand corner, something you can click and support us on a one-time or on a monthly basis.
All righty. And the 7 previous interviews, including 6 specifically on Family of Secrets that I did roughly a year ago, are available at spitfirelist.com in the For the Record section. This concludes side 1. For the Record program number 743, Interview with Russ Baker. This program is being recorded on May 27th of the year 2011. For Russ Baker, this is Dave Emory saying thanks for listening. Hello, my name is Dave Emory, and this is Side 2 For the Record program number 743, Interview with Russ Baker. This program is being recorded on May 27th of the year 2011. Happy Memorial Day, everybody. Once again, it is my pleasure and privilege to bring back to our airwaves Russ Baker, the author of the consummately important landmark tome Family of Secrets, subtitled The Bush Dynasty, America's Invisible Government, and the Hidden History of the Last 50 Years, and also editor-in-chief of the Who, What, Why website. Russ, welcome back once again to our airwaves.
Thanks, Dave.
we were talking about what people can do. I know I've been doing this for a long time, and I get depressed sometimes. It really gets to me. If I was dispassionate about this stuff, I'd be watching American Idol or some. I'd be engaged in the frivolity that Edith Wharton spoke about. So, but people do get depressed, and that's certainly very understandable. And yet, we're at that point in time. There've been so many different exhortations from patriots of various kinds, and I don't mean the contemporary brand of jingoist patriots, but real patriots, the Thomas Jeffersons and others, about the need to get down to business when you have to get down to it. What would you suggest for the average person in the listening audience? What would you suggest that they do?
Well, actually, there are so many things you can do. This is the fascinating part of it. People say, well, what are the solutions? There are thousands and thousands of NGOs, non-governmental organizations, nonprofits, local community groups, and they are actually making a difference. They need more people to be involved in them, but they do make a difference. And then there are national organizations that make a difference or have ideas on how to make a difference. I'll just give you an example of something recently. I may misreference this. I think it's called UK Uncut, I want to say. And they've started a movement here in this country. And they basically, what they did was, it had been reported that a couple of big UK companies were not paying their taxes. And they thought, well, wait a minute, we're consumers of these products. And one of them was a big mobile phone company. And they went and they got a big crowd spontaneously with Twitter, start thinking about what you saw in Egypt. And they rallied in front of these phone stores. And the phone company didn't like it, and whoever was the big shareholder there had to deal with this having not paid the taxes. And this thing spread throughout Britain. The fact that story is not a big story in the United States, that the media here are not telling us the story of how the British people have been rising up, is in itself extremely revealing. But they now have this Uncut, I want to say it's called. Maybe we can put something up on the Who, What, Why site with some more information on that. But they've got that going here now. And so you can just connect with a bunch of other people on whatever issue it is that matters to you. And if you organize and you get in their face, they do something about it. It's not that things don't change. It's that we don't understand where the problems are, and then we don't take any action. And the fact of the matter is, unless they want to explicitly change this country into an authoritarian or totalitarian country and rule us literally from the barrel of a gun, they still do have to respond. And if enough people, storm a town meeting, overwhelming hundreds and thousands of them, the city council pretty much responds. And I think that's true also on the federal level. I think that's also true with oil companies and the military-industrial complex. If enough people are upset and are expressing it, they've got to find some way to deal with that anger.
Going to the website itself, and one of the things that I always encourage people to do as well is to use the media. One of the very few things that I see as a really optimistic development, although it certainly it has been used for intelligence purposes in a big way, and it actually had its origins with DARPA. But the Internet itself, with the Internet, the ability of people to acquire, collate, store, and transmit information is unprecedented. And people can, in a very real sense, become their own media. And I encourage people to basically take the information that they hear on this broadcast. Take books like Family of Secrets, material from Who, What, Why, and the other sources that I access on this program, and spread the word. Use the Internet, call talk shows, and I think ideally each citizen should make him or herself a node of information transfer, to coin a lofty, perhaps sounding term. And I think that is step number one, because if you don't have the right information, you're not going to be able to act effectively. Your car breaks down, and let's say it's something to do with the transmission. Well, you could change the spark plugs, and that isn't going to get the car going. So you've got to have the right information. That gets back to what I think is the really subversive and, in some cases, criminal role of the media, literally covering up horrendous crimes, and crimes that do terrible damage to the American people and to citizens around the world. And that brings us back to Family of Secrets and Who, What, Why, dedicated essentially to that same purpose, to penetrating to what the Germans call Nachrichten, rending the night, which is their word for intelligence. You know?
Yeah, I mean, not a day goes by when I don't hear that some so-called ordinary person, some retiree, or we have truck drivers and teachers, people who read Who, What, Why regularly, who have read Family of Secrets, people, doctors and lawyers and engineers and students working part-time jobs in fast food places. I meet all kinds of people in pizza parlors and so on, and they say, wow, I read that book, or I love that website, and they tell me stories of what they did, and they sent an email out to a bunch of people, and then people that they sent it to sent it on to other people, and then somebody scheduled a local event, and people began talking amongst themselves, and it created some new organization. Other people use Twitter, or they use Facebook, or they're just so, Reddit. There are so many of these things, and there are new things all the time, and it's kind of fun, actually. And the great thing about it is that you can kind of be sitting in the comfort of your home in your bathrobe and pushing a few buttons and really pushing knowledge out there into the world. And then people use that stuff. They use it at work, over lunch, in a discussion with a coworker, and they pull something out and they point to things and they change minds. And our problem in this country really is that it's not so much that we have to worry about what Obama does or something. It's that we need to first change minds among the people. The people need to know what's going on, and I think what we were discussing earlier about the obstacles I've seen with Family of Secrets, we can't even penetrate the audiences that, like Jon Stewart or Rachel Maddow or Keith Olbermann, they don't even know about any of this.
Yep, it is interesting how stratified the entire media establishment is, because they're viewed as alternative. Although if you're on the Comedy Channel, I don't know how alternative that is. These are major corporate interests that run these channels. But yeah, there's the right-wing media, then there's the so-called mainstream media, which really are right-wing media past a point, and then there are the so-called progressive media, and then farther to the left you have, for example, Pacifica Radio, but there are very profound and to a large extent uniform discontinuities. There are things you don't talk about, and if you do talk about them, you're not going to talk about them there,
Well, that's right. For example, in my research into the Bush family for Family of Secrets, I studied George W. Bush, and then I studied his father, George H.W. Bush. I came upon the indications that George H.W. Bush had another past, that it was not being discussed in the media. This was the real explanation of why he was made CIA director as a novice, supposedly, and it was about how he actually had been a very important player in covert U.S. intelligence and very sensitive and, I would say, illegal domestic operations over the years. This led me back to the story of his not remembering where he was the day that Kennedy was shot, my curiosity about that, and then spending several years trying to establish where the elder Bush was at the time Kennedy was shot, then getting into the whole Kennedy assassination thing, which was new to me, something I had no opinions on, no background in, spent a long time looking into that, and the result being 4 chapters of largely new information on the Kennedy assassination, changed my understanding of all that, as apparently changed a lot of other people's understanding. Anyway, that story, we need to get that out to a larger audience. How do you do that? That's very, very tricky, because the New York Times basically seems to have a rule that they won't write about the Kennedy assassination at all. Now, how could you not write about one of the most seminal, most dramatic, most consequential events of our history? They don't, 9/11, whatever you think about it, there's almost no discussion of another enormous event. Watergate, something I get into with several chapters of new information, astonishing to me and astonishing to readers, connecting Watergate to the Kennedy assassination and understanding that what we thought was going on and Richard Nixon's role in this was wrong, that these are crafted stories that are pushed out there. And so this kind of stuff, how do we need to all work together and strategize. How do we get these things into the New York Times? How do we get Jon Stewart to be willing to talk about a book like this or the kinds of stories we're doing on Who, What, Why. And so we all, I think, Dave, have to be part of this effort to kind of find some cracks in the facade of the establishment and begin to inject the truth.
I think a lot of this, if I'm understanding what you're saying, and not imposing my own views, basically it's going to have to go from the grassroots up. In other words, when, not necessarily the city council, but say when Jon Stewart or some of these people who occupy the mid-range of the media establishment, perhaps when they are petitioned, and consistently so by their audience, to begin talking about the Kennedy assassination or other things, although as a comedian he may be limited somewhat in that regard. The late Sam Kinison, not my favorite comedian, he actually had begun talking about the Warren Report before his death, so who knows. But I think that if people want to see more truth, they're going to have to take the bit in their mouths and run with it, and basically put it in the faces of the people they want to be telling the truth. Because otherwise, again, referencing the Upton Sinclair quote, it's difficult to get them to do it when not understanding it or not doing it. Their job depends on that, particularly in our climate these days when certainly the economic waters are deep, turbulent, and perilous.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because people are always saying to me, why, you should be on Jon Stewart, you should be on Oprah, you should be on, and they name their favorite show as if it's my fault that this book hasn't been on there. But we have very good publicists and a high-quality publisher. I myself have a long track record in journalism and am known. So there aren't any clear obstacles there except that these shows, for whatever reason, were sent these books and chose not to contend with it at all. But I agree with you, Dave, that it is up to all of us when we think there's important information and we patronize some establishment. It's just like if you're a regular at a restaurant or a bar or anything else, if you tell them, you really ought to think about such and such, the more important you are to them and the more of you who say to them you should do this, the more inclined they are to finally take action. It is the squeaky wheel syndrome. All of these shows are dependent, of course, on audience satisfaction. And, I believe actually that these are mostly good people and that if they are presented with a petitioning, if you will, from enough people, they can go to their bosses and say, I think we should do this because it's getting to the point where people are starting to wonder why we don't. They want us to do it, and maybe there's a delicate way that we can begin to kind of go into this material. And as I say, these are not bad folks. I think most of the people, the mainstream media, from New York Times to Washington Post to CBS to CNN, are basically good people who need to be, they need the rest of us to supply them with, I think, the courage and the energy to go to the next level.
And I think, too, another factor and another motivation for doing exactly what we're talking about, basically people getting out and making some noise. Be polite, because if you act like a jerk, you're going to impress people in a negative way. But basically getting the word out and putting some gentle but firm pressure on those media outlets and individuals whom you would like to see doing this. And that is that at bottom, one of them, I'm going to fuse a synapse here. One of the academics, well known to students of the JFK assassination, and someone who's been, I understand has been very supportive of your book, is Professor Peter Dale Scott, the brilliant Berkeley professor. And he wrote, there was a volume that he co-edited back in 1976 called The Assassinations, Dallas and Beyond, which talked about some of the links between the Kennedy assassination and Watergate. But in the introduction to the book, or the foreword, he said that he had spoken to a number of mainstream political figures who had declined to run for office because they knew full well what had really happened to John Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King, or others, and they feared for their safety if they pursued the agenda, the political agenda that they would like to pursue. And I think that that is one of the things that people have to understand. There have been media figures and other political figures that have bitten the farm. Regular listeners to this program will have just heard, for the record 742, called Body Count. And there have been some very suspicious and to anybody with half a brain, obvious political murders in Alabama, connected with what one astute blogger termed Karl Rove's Alabama and some of the political machinations down there. And some of these obvious killings have been called suicides, and it's just ludicrous. But the effect of that is what the late Jim Garrison, who investigated the Kennedy assassination as New Orleans DA, referred to as intimidation by induction. People see this and they say, well, maybe discretion's the better part of valor here. And beyond that, they fear for the safety of their families. If, however, a lot of people are talking about these things, it's not that easy to pull off some of this skullduggery. Remember the famous footage from Tiananmen Square where the kid is facing up to that tank. That tank could have squashed him at any moment, but because people were watching, the tank was trying to get out of the kid's way. And I think, in a sense, that might be something of an operational paradigm. If enough people make enough noise, it's not going to be that easy for the malefactors of great wealth, for the people who would direct the bullets or daggers or toxins or whatever in a strategic sense to do what they do. I think, again, Nachrichten, penetrating the dark and shedding light into areas that have illuminated. No, I'm not talking about the Illuminati, some of you wacko conspiracy guys out there. That is what we've got to do. We've got to, people have got to understand that it's up to them. And it's not reasonable to expect the media figures, academicians, political figures, and others who, on the one hand, have the very real material rewards of cooperation in front of them and perhaps in their bank accounts, and who, on the other hand, have these very stark examples of what can happen as well. And so these are things that people need to pay attention to and become active in. And in a sense, they have to light the fire and fan the flames themselves.
Yeah, what's amazing to me is that I often talk to people who are afraid to take the slightest risk of any kind. And all I can say is if you live your life like that, afraid to say something to another individual, they're sitting somewhere and somebody's encroaching on their space and they won't say anything. You need to sort of practice courage. And when you start doing it when very little is at stake, you build yourself, you become stronger and stronger so that when something very, very serious confronts you, you're able to protect yourself and your family and perhaps your country. And I think that's what we see, that our population is divided all along a line from those who won't do anything at all about anything and are terrified of their own shadow, to those who are almost recklessly bold. And but I agree with you. I think that if more of us just start doing tiny little things, just little exercises, encourage. And again, if you're not somebody who bothers to pick up a phone and call a show, or you're afraid to read a book because you think you can't sleep, or you've never forwarded an email, just start with these little tiny exercises and do those and see how that goes. And you're going to be gratified to see that people thank you, that people really appreciate it. They view you in a new light, and it improves. It can improve the quality of your own life, actually. And then you start saying, this is kind of fun to be active, and it's kind of fun to study and learn new information and master these daunting mysteries, and people like this stuff. And I mean, as I say, it's been so gratifying to me. Family of Secrets, despite my not getting on so many of those major shows, is now a bestseller, and it's sold a lot of books, and it's continuing. It's actually, the sales are almost growing because again, of this grassroots kind of brush fire movement. And we're going to do the same thing with Who, What, Why. It's still small. It's fairly new. Most people have never heard of the site, but let's spread the word and let's grow it, and let's let people know that there isn't just CNN and all those how about all those websites with the celebrity gossip, that there are other things that you can go to.
Yeah, not only that, but with regard to reading specifically, the brain is not separate from the body. People keep their bodies in shape, they exercise, take care of themselves. The way you work out your brain is reading. It's part of the body. If you were to put a bullet through your brain, it's going to immediately and permanently affect all of the other systems of your body. The way you work out your brain is reading. It makes the brain stronger. It actually has a definite effect on health, on cognitive functions. Television is the opposite. It weakens the brain. It lowers attention span. So I think that people can look at it in that way too. And certainly, if you want to really develop some cerebral muscles, Family of Secrets would be a really good initial training program, because it's a good, formidable read and a very necessary one. The program that I do is designed to sort of fill in that gap. I refer to myself as a journalistic step-up transformer. I take information that's on the public record and make it more public. Well, certainly I'm never going to be on CBS or any of those media, or Maddow or Jon Stewart or any of those. Yet there are people that affect things at that level who definitely listen, and the word gets around. Part of the problem, too, is our media template itself is structured for superficiality. It's a soundbite culture, and your book falls at the opposite end of the spectrum. It is weighty, and it deals with things in the depth in which they need to be dealt, and it's important to avoid soundbites. So that's why I really appreciate your stretching out on those 6 hours last year. But that's what I think is required, so that even if people maybe are too busy to read the book now, at the very least, or people have heard bad things about it. I mean, there's one author in particular, I'm not going to mention his name, but I saw a review by a JFK assassination researcher, and it was a disparaging review, and if I hadn't read the book, I would have been hard-pressed to say that this was the same book I'd read. If people have heard disparaging comments, they can become acquainted at least superficially with the book through those 6-hour interviews, and then they can take the next step, read the book, then begin accessing who, what, why website, and again, become the media. And I think that's a very important thing to do. Otherwise, you wind up belonging to the lie.
Media literacy is critically important because we all rely on guidance. You go online, if you're going to go out to do a special dinner, you go to those websites where you read people's reviews. If you're going traveling, you look at where people go on and give stars for hotels, but you don't even know those people, and you're hoping that you can divine who's got good taste and who's telling the truth. We do the same thing with the media, and so, for example, Family of Secrets was reviewed by the Washington Post, but I was struck by the fact that instead of having any of their eminently qualified staff members who cover the CIA, the presidency, and so on review it, they gave it to an outsider who is a satirist. And I was struck by that, and I obviously, there's something wrong right there when there's a almost 600-page book about the President of the United States with 50 pages of footnotes, and you give it to a guy who writes novels to review it. They're telling you something about their paper and their role as establishment gatekeepers. And we had this with another paper, the Los Angeles Times, where an in-house person did a review. He was not the right person, actually, to review this. But he took off. He basically was upset. He essentially said anyone who questions the official story on the JFK assassination does not deserve our consideration or respect. And I was struck by that because we know that a vast majority of the American people do not accept the traditional explanation. And yet there it was, and that was in that very big and important newspaper.
This is also an example of spin, because the fact of the matter is the Warren Commission itself, aside from the fact that it was fiction, the Warren Commission had no legal status whatsoever. It was a presidential fact-finding commission, but a special House Select Committee, even though itself, its own investigation was badly compromised, concluded that there had almost certainly been conspiracies behind the assassinations of John Kennedy and Martin Luther King, and they made recommendations to the Justice Department to, among other things, begin investigating David Ferry and the anti-Castro Cubans in New Orleans. And when, following the movie JFK, some of the committee's files became public, it turns out that the assistant counsel, I think he was, in charge of the New Orleans aspects of the investigation, concluded that Clay Shaw, who was the fellow who Garrison was investigating, was either one of the planners of or a cutout to the planners of the assassination. And yet, even among JFK assassination researchers, Garrison is pilloried. But when somebody makes a statement like that, they're basically pillorying a congressional select committee and a lot of very significant people there. So it is not even consistent with our established political history.
What struck me in my work for Family of Secrets was when I began finding these connections between George H.W. Bush and key figures who are connected in some way to the events of November 22. None of that gets mentioned in this LA Times review. He just skips it. For example, he apparently either didn't read the book or he didn't think it was interesting that the same man who said he couldn't remember where he was on November 22 actually turns out to have been in Dallas. He doesn't find that interesting. He doesn't find it interesting that his lifelong friend, George de Mohrenschildt, was the basically the father figure to Lee Harvey Oswald in Lee's apartment in his life, driving and eating together and so on a daily basis in the year before the assassination. And we have letters between Mr. Bush and George de Mohrenschildt, and this is not interesting to the LA Times. And so that's why really we need to say to people, please read this book, Family of Secrets. Please go to this website, whowhatwhy.com. Please judge it for yourself. If it seems like it's cockamamie, fine. But I can tell you, 90-some% of what we understand of the people who read these things, look at the Amazon reviews there. We have almost 5 out of 5 solid stars from 130 people, random people who took the time to read it and post something.
One thing comes to mind. The LA Times is run by the very powerful, it used to be, now I believe they're owned by the Chicago Tribune, but it used to be run by the Chandler family. And one of the things you talk about in Family of Secrets was how the Chandler family apparently networked with Prescott Bush Sr. and helped to boost the candidacy of Richard Nixon. So
they were in business together in a military contracting company right at the moment that, and this is the secret history that is in Family of Secrets, that they actually selected an unknown Richard Nixon to run against a man who was a thorn in the side of Wall Street.
Mm-hmm. It may be this reviewer's disparaging stance toward your book may very well have been a case of a man's job depending on his not understanding, or at least not providing a favorable review to corrupt Upton Sinclair.
No idea why, but anyway, the key thing here is we do have some freedom still in this country. I was able to find a publisher for Family of Secrets. They got behind it. I had an agent. We had publicists, and we have been on shows. We've been on with Dave Emory. I think critically important because of Dave, your unique understanding of American history. But we've all actually been on hundreds of shows now around the country that have had the guts to do this. And so, no, we haven't broken through into the mainstream media. But again, I think that's coming, and I think that this is going to be transformative when all of the people who listen to this and who read Family of Secrets, go to our website, Who, What, Why, become part of this movement. We're going to bust out, folks, and we are going to make a difference, and we're going to see things change. I really do believe that.
Let's hope so. And certainly I think we're in a position now where we really don't have any choice. We are up against it. And if we do not correct the course of the ship of state, we're all going to basically be treading water. Things are right up against it. And again, the quote from Mort Saul, one of my role models, one of the people who spurred me to do what I do. How many lies can you allow yourself to believe before you belong to the lie? And people are familiar with the concept of the big lie. Well, Family of Secrets is the big truth, and I think people need to resolve to disseminate that big truth. We've spoken about Family of Secrets. Tell them about Who, What, Why.
So, whowhatwhy.com. We are a nonprofit. It's an investigative news and analysis site on the web. We try to post new things each day, and we're trying to build this up into, we want to be the new mainstream media, actually. We want to train a whole new generation of reporters. We want to bring back a lot of the best reporters who were laid off. We want to bring them in and have them work together on exciting projects on a day-to-day basis.
Very good. So Who, What, Why, and Family of Secrets, there is a very, very good start. This concludes Side 2 of For the Record program number 743, interview with Russ Baker. This is being recorded on May 27th of the year 2011. For Russ Baker, this is Dave Emory saying thanks for listening.